Can climate change alarmists go too far?
Yeah. I think so. I think I understand what you're saying, right? I get your point, because I think what we see, right, is we get a lot of sensationalism too, right? Like, especially in the media, right? Because the media sensationalizes everything. So sometimes like a report will come out, and I think the way they frame it or they paint the narrative, like sometimes can sound a little bit more scary than it should be. And I think that's not good for a couple reasons, right? Because I don't like to have full out, even though I fall into this trap sometimes myself, but this full out doom and gloom approach, because if there isn't, like, either way, right? Like whether you believe in or accept the science or you don't accept the science, right? At the end of the day, right? It's like, we need to have some kind of hope, right? Like if there's no hope there, like it's kind of like, then what's the point of us even doing anything, right? What's the point of even trying to do it?
You don't want to be cynical, basically. So the doom and gloom can go both ways, regardless of the facts of the matter. But the reason I asked about that is, if you are alive long enough, you're a little bit older than me, you've definitely been around enough. Now, we weren't alive in or you were almost alive in the 70s, but there's a lot of trends with this kind of narrative that for older people like us, not to age us, we've seen that a lot of the assumptions didn't actually pan out. There was an ice age panic in the 70s. There was a hurricane panic in the early 2000s. There was in 2014, there was an Arctic ice extent alarm. There was drought predictions. There was in the 90s, global temperatures rising, which global warming quickly was reformatted to climate change, because they couldn't just hold to an upward rising temperature. They had to fluctuate between down and up, which is why they reformatted to merely changing in climate. The 1980s, there was a tornado debacle where people were getting scared of that. There was a polar bear extinction scare of 2007. There was an the acidification crisis of 2010 that they argued, global flooding in 2008. The list goes on, and like you said, this is consistent with what you said, is that media generally presents this as alarmist regardless of the facts. But what I see is that the culture of climate change is really, at least in my experience, is really rooted in this alarmist doom and gloom. If we don't do this, we're going to die kind of mentality. And so, how do you bridge the gap between the people who absolutely lose their mind, even though the predictions end up being wrong every time? How do you manage that for people? Because, if you're trying to argue that it's scientific, that the climate is changing and we're at the cause, right? That's a scientific claim. And the scientific claim needs to be communicated independent of the potential consequences. But I find that if you relay the potential consequences, you get people agreeing with the science just because they're scared, And that's like what ends up happening with Christians. You get scared into Christianity. And I say that's wrong on both sides. What do you say?
Well, yeah, you've said a lot, and I can dig into all that deeper. There's a lot of inaccuracies that I can dig into a little bit when some of your statements, they're kind of pulling you down the wrong path. I'm trying to look at the sentiment though, like let's just take it as like very, very high level. Like, what would be the purpose? Like, to be like creating all this fake stuff, like, to make all this, like, well, I don't know the answer, but I'm just curious what you think it is. Why would all these scientists around, alternative. And there's different, and you have to keep in mind, it's different science academies around the entire planet that work for different organizations, get paid differently, but they all come to the same conclusion. Right. So,
well, I mean, they could get paid to come to conclusions. That happens. There's a little bit of that in science where the funding has a clear, like, can you guys find this outcome? Can you guys search it? And it's kind of like, we'll fund it. The other thing is that you mentioned during the stream with the other guy is that there is some monetary incentive here with alternative, cascades of promised alternative energy. And that's energy. We know that oil is a massive industry. And we know that if we were to offset the use of oil and use something else, that would also be a massive industry. So I would say that's at least two variables. I guess the third would be, if there is a group of people that are collectively on board with one outcome in the world, and they come and meet at certain events, right? Let's just say Rio de Janeiro in 1992. If the World Economic Forum puts it into their literature that a part of cultivating a global alliance between countries that are on board with certain outcomes, you could probably influence some of this stuff and get certain outcomes scientifically that say, guys, you are a carbon. You yourself are carbon, and you are taking from the earth, and we need to minimize this kind of consumption. And if you treat human beings as the environment, I don't think you or me would argue against the idea that governments love to control people. And so what better control mechanism? I'm putting on my tinfoil hat a second, so just let me tighten it, okay? What better mechanism to control people than to convince them that their very existence needs to be managed, that their very existence is a carbon footprint, and we need to crack down on their very existence, what they buy, what they sell, what they do, what they consume, what they make, and everything else. I think that's a pretty good schema to outline in 20, 30 years of total domination. I think humans want to dominate, so call me cynical.
Yeah, I like to stay away from the conspiracy stuff a little bit. Like, I like to try to keep my conversations as factual as I can, right? Like, I'm a scientist at core, right? Like, my background's in science. Fair. So, like, just to circle, you've said a lot, right? So, sure. I just want to tap into a few things, right? So, one thing too, you're talking about like the models and like how people settled these things in the past and it didn't turn into fruition, right? But when you actually look at the climate models, like, let's look at Al Gore, for example. Yes, he produced that documentary. A lot of the findings. No, I'm telling him. I've actually met him in person, but like, sorry, yeah, he's good. He's good people, man. Like, he's a legit good person. I went to one of his seminars. Like, I listened to him. He was like massively inspiring. But good. What you have to remember is from that time, right? Like, from that point in time, a lot of the stuff that was in that documentary actually was accurate. A lot of it was. Now, what they did, what people took out of context and how they distort the kind of misrepresent the documentary. I don't know if you've watched it or not before, but it's like sometimes he would provide ranges, right? Because based on the science we had at the time, because what was it, early 2000s or something, like 2005 or something. Yeah. So we had ranges, right? So on the far end, it was like, yes, possibly by 2020 or 2030 or whatever he said, possibly on the extreme, on the top end of some research, it's possible that the northern ice caps would melt completely during the summer, right? Yeah. And this is how it gets distorted. Is one, they just take that extreme point. They don't talk about the range that was brought up in the documentary, because that was the far end extreme range. And then they also don't say, well, it's just during the summer. They say, oh, he said they were all going to be melted and they'd be gone. And then they also say that it's the Arctic and the Antarctic will be melted. You know, so they've kind of like rephrase the narrative to something it never was. Okay. So that's a problem. So when you actually look, if you look at the research he presented and you look the middle line of it, we're absolutely on par, right? So the models have accurately predicted warming. They've accurately predicted Arctic decline. They've actively predicted sea level rise. They actively predicted stratospheric cooling. Mm-hmm. Those are all verified. So even Exxon, in Exxon's 1970s models, because Exxon decided, hey, we're going to do our own research and prove that global warming is like not a thing. So they did their own research, and their models predicted modern warming within 0.02 degrees. So current models also still, if anything, the current models are actually slightly underestimating extremes due to the conservative assumptions that were made before, right? So the climate models didn't fail. They were actually scarily accurate. A lot of fossil fuel deniers will only say the models failed because they don't like the results, right? And here's the other thing too. You have to remember, here's another way to think about it, right? So remember the tobacco. I don't know if you're a smoker or not. Are you a smoker? No. Okay, me neither. But like back in the day, and we're kind of old enough to remember a little bit of this, like, you know, so science discovered at some point, right, that smoking's bad for our health, like say the 50s or something, around there, 40s, 50s, somewhere around there. Science like, yep, for sure, if you smoke, it's bad, right? It's going to be bad for your health. what the tobacco industry did then is they hired all these different PR groups and stuff like that to essentially spread disinformation like that sounds sciencey, that kind of countered the actual science to kind of flood the zone with a lot of disinformation. So if you're a smoker, right? So you hear the science from one side, but you also hear these commercials, and there's a commercial with a doctor he's wearing a white coat saying something different, right?
Yeah.
Well, then they're going to say, hey, the science isn't really settled, therefore I'm going to continue buying my cigarettes, right? So it's a way for the tobacco industry to continue maintaining money because they don't, that news is going to devastate their industry.
Okay.
Now, fast forward to the fossil fuel industry, they actually hired a lot of the same agencies that the tobacco industry used to pump out disinformation on climate.
Yeah.
And they've been funneling millions and millions of dollars to spread disinformation. So a lot of the points that you were saying, there's quite a few points in there, are from that pool of disinformation. And I'm not blaming you at all whatsoever.
I have a question,
Honestly, I'm not, because it's really complicated.
That's fine. Let's just grant it.
Yeah.
Let's just grant it. How do you determine whether there's disinformation for the pro-climate change activists?
Well, because on the pro side too, like, do you have a background at all in science? And I'm not trying to
I debate science quite a bit, and I stick to what is proper science and what is pseudoscience. You use the term modeling, which I was going to touch on. I argue that modeling is useful, but modeling is no replacement for an experiment that establishes a causal variable for an effect. It could be useful, but it could be wrong. It's not the arbiter between two competing models. And so
yeah, but we rely on models all the time, though, right? In all kinds of science, because you have to do modeling to kind of predict where things are going. That's the only way you can do it. It's a common thing used all across science.
I understand, but I'm saying that the distinction here is modeling. If you use it and it's accurate in prediction, I'm just saying that it's not an adequate substitute for a proper experiment.
Well, but that when you look at say global warming and climate change, right? It's oh my god, I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Oh my god, I totally lost my train. Because as soon as I said that, I thought of another one of your points. I was like, when you mentioned the climate change and the global warming, that's something I hear a lot too. Is like, oh, at some point they changed the term from global warming to climate change. Actually, that's not true, because both those terms, and you can look back in the data, go back to like the 20s or early 1900s, both terms were used. The difference is like, I think when a lot of people were talking about it initially, they were saying global warming, right? Because that is what's actually happened. That's the core of what's happening, right? So here's how it works, right? So the sun's rays, they're going to hit the planet, right? What normally happens is the sun rays come in, they're going to, once they hit the earth and the water, then they turn into heat, right? And warmth, right? That's how we get warmth. Then some of that heat is going to radiate back out into space, right? And we don't want it all to radiate out to space, otherwise we'd be like the moon, right? Without an atmosphere, we'd just freeze instantly, right? So some of that, so the CO2 that's in our air, what it does is it actually traps. So when those the heat energy is trying to escape, it kind of bounces off those CO2 molecules, and some of them, it will redirect that energy, and some of it gets redirected back to Earth,
and
right?
The trees
so that's
love
what kind
it,
of
right?
gives us, and that's what keeps us like within this nice habitable warm zone, right? So but the problem is when you add more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, right? So you're adding more CO2, right? So now the sun's coming in, and it's bouncing off the earth. It's kind of funny because I'm doing hand motions like to this, like you can see me. So it's bouncing off the earth and off the water and stuff and coming back in. But now because there's more CO2, more of that energy is being redistributed back to earth. So one of the really big telltale signs of it being global warming, and say not like, hey, the sun goes through cycles and the sun's a bit warmer right now, is that you have the upper atmosphere and the lower atmosphere. So with global warming, but due to CO2, you're going to see the lower atmosphere warm, and you're going to see the upper atmosphere actually cool, because there's less energy able to escape back out because it's being held in by the CO2. And that's what we are seeing in the data. Otherwise, you'd see both. Okay,
but I have a question. I have a question for you. Is it the case that the same phenomenon existed before man's influence?
What do you mean in terms of what? Like, are you just talking about natural? Because we know natural climate change. Climate change has occurred.
Even the concentration of CO2 and the phenomenon of the sun. It's true that before the Industrial Revolution, it's true that the same exact data could be found pre-Industrial Revolution, right?
Not the same as the data we're seeing now, not in the same manner. No, like
Why,
we've seen
wait.
things in the past. Like if we look back, right, we can see changes and shifts in like through geological time, right? Things do occur, but they tend to happen over long cycles. Like we're looking at like 10,000 to 100,000 years to have like something change, right? Whereas what's happening now is happening in decades.
Okay,
and
hold
that
on.
we haven't seen before.
Okay. So you're saying it does happen, but it just you're saying that it happens in a longer time frame, and you're saying the same phenomenon.
And they've studied this.
And you're saying
because when the planet was started warming, right, they were looking at all things like because they didn't know what the answer was initially, right? So they're like, well, is it the sun? Well, let's look at the sun. Let's study that. Is it more or less clouds?
Was it? Wait.
They looked at it, but the only thing that matches is our input of greenhouse gases. That's the only thing that makes sense.
Hold on a second. Isn't it the case that before the Industrial Revolution, even if you add time necessary, that even worse conditions, based on data, worse conditions could have existed insofar as reflecting the current conditions before the Industrial Revolution?
Well, I mean, it depends how far you want to go back, but there hasn't been anything we haven't, and if you could go back, probably depends on what research you are, what you're looking at, but like some research, like if you look at ice core data, for example, from the Antarctica, that goes back 800,000 years.
Gotcha.
So they can determine from that we haven't had it this warm in least 800,000 years. So a lot of new research is suggesting millions and millions of years now.
I understand. So if that's true, what you're looking at is raw data that says the CO2 and the assumed climate, the assumed temperature, and everything else involved at a certain point in the past was potentially worse than it is now, and that required a lot of time and natural events. And you're saying today it's specifically caused by X. Now, here's where science gets interesting. How did you determine the introduction of X caused Y? Because that's proper science, right?
Yeah, but can you like, what are you getting at here?
If you're saying human behavior, which would be X, causes Y, the phenomenon of the climate,
right.
I'm asking you, how did you introduce and remove X?
I don't understand what you're
Okay,
okay,
let me take it slower.
So yeah, of course you're going to have a cause and effect, right?
Yeah. So
just
you're
like
saying
in the past.
Okay.
Changes could have happened in the past, but the cause was something else. It wasn't
That's
humans,
right.
obviously.
So I'm asking you, which is the proper use of science is the only arbiter for two competing hypotheses is an experiment, not modeling. So if it's the case that a previous existence of the Earth in its atmosphere not only matches the current, but could have been worse at the time based on the same standard, I'm asking you, what methodology did you use to determine the introduction of human behavior, this is X, the variable, caused Y, the fluctuation or rapid fluctuation of the climate on average as a whole on the Earth? You need to be able to introduce the independent variable that establishes inductively the likely cause of the phenomenon. What I'm arguing is, absent just a mere model, I'm arguing that you actually don't have the access to introduce X to demonstrate the cause of Y.
Yeah, that's not making any sense to me.
Okay, so
I don't understand what I don't understand what you're saying.
Let me use a small. Okay,
have a cause.
Let me use a smaller analogy. Do you understand that something causes the phenomenon scurvy?
Sure.
Okay, so that would mean that the introduction of X, the variable, causes the phenomenon Y, called the symptoms of scurvy, right? There's a causal relation. So if you argue from the climate scientist position that human behavior X causes environmental phenomenon Y, to make that claim from the scientific perspective, you have to introduce the behavior X and remove it and repeat it to demonstrate it's causing the phenomenon.
Okay, one second. I'm just going to bring someone else up as well, just while we're talking. I understand what you're saying, but sorry, I got some. He's just been waiting for a while.
Okay.
So I'm getting up on the panel check. Evo, can you just quickly state your name? And I don't know if we've talked before or not. I like the profile name, and the image is pretty fun.
Thanks. Yeah, I read this book to my son. I'm old, like you guys. I'm 38. But what Jimbob's trying to say,
man. Why am I the oldest one on here? It's not
I'll
fair.
be your age soon. So what Jimbob's trying to say here is that, like, look, you can't make scientific inferences without having a controlled experiment where there's an independent variable. I mean, I think that's just obviously ridiculous, but that's the point.
Wait, why is it ridiculous?
Gotcha. Okay.
It's ridiculous because there are going to be some scientific inferences that it's going to be impossible to have an independent variable, but that doesn't mean, right, it's not reasonable to believe those scientific inquiries.
Well, the difference in a belief and a scientific theory are two different things, right?
Yeah, so do you think that it's not a scientific theory without an independent variable?
Yes, because here's why. Because a belief is a correlative assumption, and an experiment is the only way to determine a scientific theory.
Okay, but that's begging the question. Where did you get that idea from?
Where did I get the idea that the scientific theory needs to be a product of the scientific method?
Yeah, where did you get the idea
the definition
that
of the definition of a scientific theory?
Gotcha. All right. So where did you get the idea that a scientific theory needs to have an independent variable?
Because if you have a theory of something that's causing a phenomenon, I like to use scurvy. If you see the symptoms of scurvy and you determine and you think that X causes scurvy and someone else thinks another thing causes scurvy, the only way to determine and arbitrate between the two
That's
hunches.
Question begging.
What do you mean question begging?
Do you know what question begging means?
You're saying that if I see a phenomenon that I think you mean you're affirming the consequent.
No, affirming the consequent is a formal logical fallacy. Question
That's
begging
right.
is an informal fallacy.
So how is
question
it
begging
question
is just
begging?
when you, it's question begging because you're assuming the conclusion in your premise, right? Look, we're asking why.
That's what a
is the case
hypothesis
that you-
is, dude.
No, just chill.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. If I say hold on a second. Let me just ask you a question.
Okay.
If I say what caused the man to die, and I think that it's some sort of metallic poisoning, you're saying it's question begging to ask the question scientifically, I think that metal is causing this death.
No.
You're saying that's question begging?
No.
So what are you saying question begging? If I say there's
Well,
something that's...
and you start to
Hold
spaz
on.
out, man.
If I say there's something...
Jim. I think he was trying to answer you, but you kind of jumped in on him. It sounded like he was starting to answer your question, but you got to let him respond.
My apologies.
The question, right, or the conclusion is supposed to be, well, therefore it's not science because there's no independent variable. When I asked you for the evidence for that, you said, well, look, it's just not science if there's no independent variable.
I see what you mean. So a scientific theory, do you agree that something is a scientific theory and there are many things that are not scientific theories?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so if we both agree scientific theories exist, can you tell me what constitutes what's required for something to be a proper scientific theory and something not that?
Yeah, so that's called the demarcation problem in philosophy of science. Most philosophers of science think it's quite vague, right? There's no specific analytic definition that's going to include one thing as science, one thing out of science, but generally speaking, they're going to use a methodology that's rigorous. There's going to be communication between practitioners in the field. It's going to be repeatable in cases where it can be.
Would you call that an experiment?
Well, an experiment, the type of what you're referring to, is one where there's an independent variable, the thing you learn about in fourth grade, right?
Right. Okay, so can you give me an example?
So my question to you, is, where are you getting this definition of science that requires, or scientific inquiry, I should say, that requires an independent variable? Have you ever heard a single scientist or philosopher of scientists stipulate this? Because, I mean, you can just look up on Wikipedia and it'll go to a source that writes about the scientific method, right? And it specifically states that, you don't need to have an independent variable for it to be considered science.
So that means you don't need, for a scientific theory, you don't need an experiment to determine the likelihood of a cause then?
Well, not in the way that you're defining experiment, where there has to be an independent variable. Okay,
hold on. So if I have a theory about what causes scurvy, and there's two hypotheses, can you tell me the arbiter that's going to determine which hypothesis is correct if it's not a scientific theory or a scientific method?
Are you saying like if it's ceteris paribus, all the conditions are equal on both sides?
Yeah, if you have let's say two ships come in. one, the guys come off and they have the symptoms of scurvy, and one ship comes in and they don't have the symptoms of scurvy, and I want to determine what's causing these symptoms. Can you tell me, other than an experiment, how you're going to determine a scientific theory around what causes scurvy?
Well, you could look. I mean, this is getting like really kind of wild because I don't know too much about it. But
it's kind of derailing, to be honest.
It's not derailing, dude.
No, it's fine.
No, don't save them. Don't save them.
No, it's fine. Look, so I mean, if you don't need to do the experiment, it would be better to be able to do experiment when you can in that example. So you should. But let's just say that you couldn't do the experiment. Well, you would just look for, signs and symptoms of scurvy. You look some other kind of metric or marker in the people to determine, what was the etiology. And it may be the case that like you're going to have two theories that are just so close to each other where the data is equally accommodated by the two theories.
Okay.
Then you would just have to tally up. Then you would have to. Then you'd be. This is just like a sore situation. It's not the best situation to be in.
No,
you can't do the experiment.
You're saying that.
But
you
then
can't.
just listen. But then what you would have to do to determine which theory is true is tally up the theoretical virtues and vices. Now, I agree with you. It would be better to be able to do the experiment in this situation. But that doesn't mean the other way around where you infer things. Like the way the forensic scientists infer things, that doesn't mean it's not scientific inquiry. That's my point.
Hold on a second. I didn't ask about inquiry. I asked about a scientific theory. Inquiring scientifically about the natural world is not the same as developing a scientific theory. Now you're conflating the two. So let me get more precise here. What is the ultimate arbiter for two competing hypotheses?
It's always going to be theoretical virtues. It's going to boil down to that.
Oh wait, so if I have an idea of what causes X and someone else has an idea of what causes X and we're sharing the same data, you're saying the ultimate arbiter isn't an experiment but rather a theoretical virtue?
Look, if you could do an experiment, you would obviously prefer that, right?
I didn't ask what you prefer, dude.
Oh, obviously I prefer an experiment.
I didn't ask what you prefer. I asked what's the ultimate arbiter between two competing...
I don't know. Do you mean the best way?
No. Listen. You're not listening to the question.
What do you mean by ultimate?
Listen to my question. What is the ultimate arbiter between two competing hypotheses?
What do you mean by ultimate? Because I've got two interpretations and answers and you said no.
So what I mean by ultimate is if you have one hypothesis that X causes Y and one hypothesis that says B causes Y, what do we do to determine
Obviously, an experiment.
Okay.
I already answered that. That's the third part.
Is there any other thing you can do?
Yeah, you could. If you can't do the experiment, you can look for other things, right? You could look for.
That doesn't tell me shit, dude. I'm telling you how you arbitrate between the two competing hypotheses.
If you can do the experiment, you do the experiment. But sometimes you can't.
Dude,
let's not get lost in the sauce here. Look, what you're arguing here. Stop over talking. Look, what you're arguing here is that it's not scientific inquiry and it can't be built up to a scientific theory. No, I didn't say that, dude. You're lying again. If you can't do a scientific experiment.
You're lying again. I already corrected you on this.
And trying to argue that scientific experiments are the best ways to determine which theory
you haven't corrected it.
I did correct him. No, you guys are ganging up now.
But that's not what I argued in the first place.
I'm not ganging up.
I stand by science. Is that you don't need to have
stand by science, the method that you don't think needs to exist.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't listening. I'd actually mean
I don't know what direction you're going here. Like this is actually very derailing because it's not.
Hunter, stop it! It's not derailing. We're talking about science and the rigor of science. Look, I didn't ask about scientific inquiry. Inquiring is like questioning, right? What's this? What's that? Maybe this.
Okay, I mean,
dude, let me talk.
What
inquiry? I don't mean.
What is wrong with you guys?
I just mean doing science. That's all I mean.
Host speaking. Jim. Like just let's scale this down a little bit. Like. Jim, just okay, calm down. What I'm trying to get to, I don't understand what your overall point of it. Like, what are you trying? Is this your argument to is this your argument to disprove? Like,
he's trying to undercut the science here because there's no experiment that you can do.
So he's asking me.
Well, I know, but it's just ridiculous. So he's
yeah, it's obviously ridiculous. My whole point
saying it's ridiculous doesn't actually answer the question. I'll do it one more time. No. He asked me a question, not you. Okay, so
I didn't get to finish my question, but
I understand your question, Hunter. You're asking, what am I trying to say here?
I'm not Hunter.
What I'm trying to say.
Hey, Hunter, how you doing? Speaking of Hunter, how you doing, buddy?
What's up, Wander? I'm good.
Good to see you, man. Good to see you. Welcome to the panel. Hunter's regular to the show here, so
Hey,
Feel
Andrew.
free to hop in anytime you want.
So what I'm saying is that when it comes down to science, not inquiry, I'm talking about developing a scientific theory. I'm saying scientific theories are at the tail end of an experiment, and there's a reason for that. The reason is, we'll go back to scurvy. When I asked you what's the arbiter for two competing hypotheses for what causes the phenomenon scurvy, you said, well, it's an experiment. Ultimately, that's what we would want, is an experiment to determine inductively with repetition, introducing a variable and removing it to determine what causes scurvy. And I said, I asked you a question, absent the actual experiment with the introduction of the cause, how would you determine what is actually causing scurvy? And the answer is, we wouldn't know, but we would have decent hunches. That's all you said.
Jimbob, can you put this in the context of like climate change? So
Sure.
I just did.
The rest of us can like better
let's just steel man him, and he'll agree with or disagree. What the point he's trying to make is that we shouldn't be so certain in global warming science because you can't do an experiment where you vary the independent variable. Right?
I want to hear hear his explanation for that.
Yeah. So if you say climate is doing X or this or that phenomenon, increasing, decreasing, whatever you say, what we know is that there's a past where the same conditions existed and had one cause. And in this case, we're assuming a new cause. And I'm saying in order to do proper science, you need to have access in what you call the cause so that you can manipulate and introduce it to the environment to then produce the effect. So then you can develop a theory around cause and effect. I call that regular science. Like, that's not controversial. But what you're saying is, no, we can.
It is controversial because the whole point you're supposed to be arguing here is that science is limited to this very restricted fourth grade understanding, and that's the evidence I asked you earlier.
Is irrelevant. You can introduce
so
logic.
Can you show me a source that shows that they agree with you and this is what science is?
A source, like the definition of scientific theory.
Yeah, can you show me that this is what science is constrained by? When you walk out of this like constraint, it's not science anymore.
Yeah,
that's what you're saying.
I'll tell you. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that there's a thing called a scientific theory?
Yeah.
Okay, and a scientific
this
theory.
Is a ridiculous conversation.
Dude, stop. Do you believe?
I'm sorry, I just can't help it.
But,
this is not an argument, man. All you're doing is talking over me. Dude, you're all just talking over me.
No philosopher of science or scientist agrees with you.
Why do you ask me a question and then talk over me, dude?
Yeah, but you're not giving the source.
I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you, if there's such a thing,
go ahead, sorry.
If there's something called a scientific theory, that means it's distinct from not that, right?
Yep. And
so that means, hold on. So that means that not anything could be called a scientific theory, right?
That's right.
Okay, so the scientific theory is a well-substantiated, comprehensive explanation of some aspect of the natural world developed through the scientific method. Is there one scientific method or many?
Yeah, that's my point. I'll listen very closely. When people say the scientific method, they aren't talking about necessarily having an independent variable there. You're confusing what you learn in middle school called the scientific method, observation, hypothesis, blah, 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 the independent variable, right? As some kind of strict, written in stone way that all scientific inquiry or all science, that's all I mean by scientific inquiry, is just doing science, has to be done. Now, my question to you that you've dodged 4 times now.
So you didn't answer,
where are you getting the idea from?
Jim, he's asking you a question.
Where are you getting the idea from? Where are you getting the idea from that this strict 4th grade interpretation of the scientific method is necessary for it to be a scientific inquiry?
I just read it to you. Let me read it again. Listen closely. Listen closely. Watch this. A scientific theory is a well-substantiated, comprehensive explanation of the aspect of the natural world developed through the, not plural, the scientific method, singular. So do you disagree with that definition?
No, but you're confusing what they mean by scientific method.
Guys, you are collapsing here. If you don't disagree,
I don't think so.
Look! You guys keep interrupting. You guys keep interrupting.
Sorry, go ahead and then I'll respond. Just don't interrupt.
You guys keep interrupting. You guys keep interrupting. Keep interrupting. It just shows that you guys are not. You don't have a good counter to this.
We've let you talk for about 75% of this. So
no, let him go so I can respond. So
I know I will let him go, but
cool.
You can unmute your mic.
Okay, cool.
Sorry.
So you ready?
I just had to put that in there.
Dude,
we are giving you time to talk.
Dude. Okay, so you guys mute. So you guys mute instead of listening. Okay.
No, I'm just controlling the panel, Jim. And
you're controlling my talking, dude.
If you don't like
you're still doing it.
Yeah, Jimbob, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. So, if a scientific theory, distinct from not a scientific theory, definitionally is a well-substantiated, comprehensive explanation of an aspect of the natural world that's developed through not plural, the scientific method, then if you agree with that definition, then what you're doing is making exclusivity of what constitutes a scientific theory. Now, if you don't agree with that definition, what you're saying is that you can develop scientific theories away from this definition, and you could use a proprietary definition to say, no, I can develop scientific theories without the rigor of the scientific method. That's not consistent with the definition itself.
Gotcha, I hear you. So the issue here, what I'm trying to bring up, is that what's happening is there's an equivocation between scientific method, the thing you learn in 5th grade, and scientific method in that definition. Now, I can send you a source where they talk about this specifically, and they specifically state that scientific inquiry, again, by that I just mean doing science that leads to theories, is not constrained by that kind of very rigid definition of scientific method. Now, again, for the 5th time, I'll ask you if you can find me a single philosopher of science or scientist that agrees with you on this, because it seems like you're just relying on a confusion about what they mean regarding the scientific method and that definition.
I'm sorry, was my definition confusing?
Yeah, I told you equivocated on scientific method.
It wasn't my definition, dude. I literally read, can you bring up a scientific theory definition of your own, please?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
you act like I wrote the definition myself.
No. When I say you're equivocating there, I mean we're equivocating on the meaning of the scientific method. How can I equivocate
if I read a definition?
Because they mean one thing and you're making it
How do you know what they mean? What are you talking about? What they mean?
Because that's the whole dispute, and I can give you evidence for that. What they mean.
Okay, so you're saying there's multiple scientific methods then?
No, I'm saying that they're using the term much more generally there, right? And the way you're using the term is the way that it's taught in 5th grade.
Okay, cool. Let's look up the scientific method then.
As somebody who's like, this is a new kind of debate. It seems like this is like a philosophy of science kind of debate.
That's part of science.
If I'm understanding it correctly.
Okay.
And what you're saying, Jimbob, is if it doesn't have an independent variable, like that is, as you define it, the scientific method, that it has to have an independent variable.
Yeah, if you're going to say X causes Y and make the claim, the way you come to that conclusion isn't by a hunch. You actually come to the conclusion by demonstrated through an experiment that actually is causing the problem, the phenomenon. And if you don't have that, you just have to bite the bullet and say, well, correlatively speaking, we have a decent enough reason to believe this is the case, but honestly, we can't actually introduce a variable. But it doesn't mean our hunch is wrong. It just means that we're limited because we can't actually demonstrate it through an experiment.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I think what Eva Waldo is saying is that like more broadly in the field of sciences, that the scientific method encompasses kind of like what you're calling correlational data. And then that is like regarded as like good science. Like you can disagree with that. It's a philosophy of science question, but that is, it seems to be like a commonly accepted
that's my point.
notion in science.
Yeah, but
can you make me big? Host?
Yeah, but the thing is, that's just called modeling.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So if you use modeling to lay out sort of an explanation of things happening, what I'm saying is that modeling can be useful, but I'm saying that it's not an adequate substitute for
okay, but that's okay. Maybe it's not adequate, but right now we're just talking about whether or not science. Okay, maybe this science is not adequate, and the science you were talking about is adequate. Okay, That's not what we're talking about. So this is from Wikipedia. It talks about scientific inquiry, and it says right there, not all steps take place in every scientific inquiry, nor at the same degree. They're not always in the same. I can't see what that
I thought
is.
I was
and then
the
you
one
can
who
see
quit.
there's two sources there listed.
Where did I write the dude? Look, you're so dishonest. It's crazy. When did I argue? Hold on, just let me clarify this. When did I use the term scientific inquiry in place of the scientific method?
Yeah, so again, I've tried to clear this up with you. Scientific inquiry is just doing science. That's all they mean there. Okay.
What's doing science if it requires an actual method, right? Is anything doing science? Like, look. If I say, I think there's milk in the fridge, if I go down and check, did I do science?
Well, that's kind of a similar thing in science, but it wouldn't be considered science for the reasons I listed earlier.
So when you say doing science, there is a standard for doing science, and then there's a standard for not doing science, right?
And it's vague. It's more vague than what you're trying to say.
Okay, so how can you determine when someone's doing science and not doing science if it's vague?
That's the demarcation problem that philosophers have been talking about for 100 years.
Okay, so
you don't.
So then you concede that you actually don't know if someone's doing proper science or not.
No, that's not a concession.
That's the entailment of it being so vague, dude.
No, what you're doing is running a
epistemic
Soyentist
problem here, dude.
Do you know what a Soyentist paradox is?
Okay, look. Let me ask you one question
here. Look, I'm trying to.
Let me ask you
a question.
No, I don't know.
Why are you dodging, dude?
Tell me the paradox.
Let him finish his point.
Tell me the paradox.
Yeah, the Soyentist paradox is the idea that, look, well, here, I'll ask a question. Like, you can tell when a man is bald, right? But
that's an
just
observation.
Because you can tell, right, yeah. You can tell a man is bald, but it doesn't require you to know exactly how many hairs on their head can be there before they stop being bald.
That's not about causation.
So I know. Just listen.
That's a category error, dude. Determining whether someone's bald.
Dude, you're not even.
No. It's a category error, dude. You can't say.
I don't think you're even understanding the point.
No, I'm
listening.
Man. Your paradox is irrelevant. Why? Because it has to do with an observation rather than a cause.
No, that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, dude. I'm not talking about any of that. Look, the Soyentist paradox I'm trying to talk about is that just because you can't pinpoint exactly when something becomes something else, like when a man becomes bald,
continuum fallacy, I understand.
It doesn't mean, exactly same thing. It doesn't mean that you can't know if a man is bald or not bald.
Okay,
right?
but that's...
So it's going to be similar here. There may be vague cases where we're not totally sure.
Can I tell you why that's
but that
not
doesn't mean
analogous?
That we can't use the term and that it's meaningless.
Can you... wait, let me do it a different way instead of speaking at you. Can you tell me why I would argue that's disanalogous?
I'm not sure, because you seem to be saying that, look, if it's not extremely specific, then we can't know.
No. It's disanalogous because if I can't tell you when a pile of sand becomes a pile of sand, that would be a metaphysical issue, right? It would be some sort of continuum problem.
Oh,
what I'm saying is something different. What?
Holy shit, that's a crazy...
What?
Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Calling something crazy and doing oh my gosh isn't an argument, dude.
Look, this isn't about like mereology or anything like that. This is about using terms and whether or not vague terms are acceptable.
You just literally said the same thing, and I used a pile of sand to represent your contention, and then you went, oh my gosh. All you said was, because there's a continuum problem with discovering when someone becomes bald, right, is the same problem that people bring up with philosophy of when a pile of sand becomes a pile of sand, or a beard becomes a beard, or when light comes to dark in a room, right?
Then why do you think I brought that up again?
Well, you brought it up as a way to introduce a red herring that has nothing to do with the cause.
So why do you think steel man me?
Because
you asked me to try to steel man you.
Steel manning you. Well, in stealing. Okay, I'll try to steel man you. You're saying because we don't know the cause, because we can't have access to, hold on, you're not even letting me fucking talk, dude.
It has nothing to do with cause. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
How does the scientific experiment have nothing to do with cause?
It has nothing to do with
How does scientific theory have nothing to do with cause?
I'm talking about the Soyentist paradox and how it's similar to when the demarcation problem.
I'm saying it's not similar because we're not talking about what causes baldness. We're talking about, in science, we're talking about what causes, let's say, what? Look. Do you agree?
Oh my God, you're so bad,
dude. You keep interrupting me. You're just giggling and coping, right?
I kind of zoned out 5 minutes ago.
Dude, you guys aren't listening. You're talking over me.
Let me get us back on track.
Look.
Let's get me back on track and then try again.
Let me ask you: Is there a difference? Evil Waldo?
Holy shit.
Listen closely. Is there a difference between what causes baldness and determining when someone's bald?
Yes.
Okay. Does science deal with the cause of baldness?
Yeah, sure.
Great. You just demonstrated why it's a category.
You're so dumb. Okay, now
dipshit.
let me get you back on track. Okay, so the
Normally,
reason why I brought up
this
fucking dipshit, dude.
You're crashing, dude.
I literally just distinguished the category error. You agreed to it,
confused.
you idiot.
Yeah, I'll make it less confusing for you. So the reason why I brought up the Soyentist paradox is because you're talking about the demarcation problem. You're saying if there isn't a specific technical, very specific definition of what is and what isn't science, then how are you going to know what science is? I brought up the Soyentist paradox because you don't need to have a very specific definition, for example, of when someone is bald to use and predicate bald properly. There may be some edge cases, some population of cases where we can't say if he's bald or not, but that doesn't mean that the term baldness or the term science, my definition of science, isn't useful or meaningful.
Meaningful and objective
Does
are
that
different.
make it clear?
Yeah, no, it doesn't actually. What you actually said.
You're on mute, Jimbob.
Oh my gosh!
I muted him for a second because he was he's hurting my head, and I wanted to hear your response.
Yeah. So the problem with that explanation is that when we talk about science and whether or not you agreed there's something called the scientific method and there's something that's not that.
Thanks, Basilix.
So if it's the case that there's something that's truly the scientific method and something that's not, and I ask you to determine how you know that, and you say we can't know that because there's a paradox, we actually don't know when something is a proper scientific method and when something is not. You're saying it's ambiguous, a scale.
Nope. What I said, what's ambiguous is exactly when something goes from not science to science. That's ambiguous, but that doesn't mean that science and not science in general is not meaningful. The same way that we can't know exactly when a man. Bro. Okay, that doesn't mean that we can't know when something is science or not science.
Okay,
the same way we can know that a bald man is bald, even though we don't know the exact moment he goes bald.
Can you tell me, being that you made the claim?
Do you understand that point?
No, but it's incoherent, and here's why.
Okay, what's incoherent about?
I'm going to tell you if you let me talk. So if it's the case that you said there's a moment where something is the scientific method and then it's not, if you make that claim, you can't make that claim without having knowledge of when that moment is. But you're arguing that you don't have knowledge of that.
That's okay. Now what you're saying here, the reductio, is that you can't ever know if somebody's bald because you don't know the exact moment they become bald. That's perfectly analogous to what you're saying.
No, it's different. Here's why. I'll tell you why it's different. I'll do it again. Determining someone's bald by some sort of gradient of the absence of hair is merely an observation. Determining why are you laughing? You're not letting me talk.
Because you're
fake laughing over me, okay? I'm not even finished what I'm saying, dude. So
how can you know if someone's bald if you don't know what it means to be bald?
Is an observation of someone's head different than what causes baldness?
Yes.
Okay, so when we talk about science, which we're talking about, we're not actually talking about the observation of when someone's bald. We're actually talking about how do you determine what causes baldness, right?
No.
We're not. So let me get this straight. When we talk about what causes baldness, when they study baldness in science, they're not actually determining what causes baldness.
We're not talking about that. Of course they are in science, but that's not what we're talking about. It's an analogy.
You're a sophist. You're a sophist.
It's an analogy. You're so lost. Actually, I think you understand the problem.
Levering your voice up doesn't make you right, dude. So I'll say this one more time, and I won't waste any more time.
Yeah, run away.
So no, I'm not running. It's just that it's looping because you're agreeing.
Yeah, you're gonna run away, dude.
No, you're giggling. You're fake giggling. So
Hey, Tim, can you pause? Everyone pause for that. I just got a new person on the panel. Allison, Canadian. Ooh, I'm Canadian too. So.
I'm Canadian. Yeah, I know this is way off topic. Can we just stick to the topic? That's why I popped on. I'm not quite sure. I can't see the whole thing.
Keep quiet, lady. Listen, lady, keep quiet.
Well, you don't know anything about me, so don't tell me to be quiet.
Listen, don't try to derail it. We're actually talking about science here.
Be quiet.
Listen, don't try to derail it. We're actually talking about science here.
You're derailing it. Oh, we got
I dropped him.
Nice.